All right, welcome everybody to Defining Your Story, a better shot at success, our latest in our series of free music business webinars from Canadian Musician and NWC Webinars. Momentarily, I'll introduce our guest presenter. We're absolutely thrilled to have Steve Waxman with us for this one. He offers entertainment career guidance in a somewhat consultant capacity. You'll have a minute while I'm going through our housekeeping here to check out his site, imstevewaxman.com. It's right there on the screen in front of you. You can get a bit of a feel for what Steve does. I'll introduce him a little better momentarily. Before we jump into it, just a few things that those of us that join us regularly will know. Questions for Steve. If you've got any now, if any come to you at any point during the presentation, please feel free to submit those via the text window in your interface there. We'll have a question period about halfway through the session, and we'll get to as many as we can there, especially ones that pertain to something timely that we've touched on in the first half of the presentation. And then, yeah, if we don't get to your question at that point, don't fret. We'll have a wider, more expansive Q&A at the end as well, where we'll try and get everyone's questions out. And yeah, just send them in as they come to you. Otherwise, there are a few files, a few resources we've got for download here, one of which is just a notepad style configuration of the PowerPoint we're going to be following. If you're an analog note taker like me, feel free to take a second. You can print that off and jot things down as we go. There's also a couple of features there that I guess kind of peripherally support what we're going to be talking about here. That being very clearly defining your narrative, your story, your identity, your image, and basically just how all of the different facets of your career should revolve around and fit into that to maximize your chance of success. I think that's all I've got to tell you. So yeah, let's keep it going here. So again, it's a privilege to have Steve joining us here. In our promotion for the event, I've been calling him a Canadian music kingmaker. I didn't ask for his permission before doing that.
I've been properly mocked for it.
But yeah, with all credit where it's due, Steve is a veteran of the music industry. We've been collaborating for, I guess, as long as I've been in this position, and it's always been a pleasure. He has helped to guide, steer, and propel the careers of the likes of Scott Hellman, Blue Rodeo, Neil Young, just to name a select few, and there's plenty more where that came from. Before his time at Warner Music Canada, which is where we met, he spent time with other labels, management company, Coin Management. So yeah, a career's worth of expertise that we're going to get to tap into here. Our idea is just to give you a general taste of the type of thing that Steve does in the context of defining your story. But then, yeah, if you're interested in learning more or how he can help you with your career, again, imstevewaxman.com is right there. And again, I'm Andrew King, editor-in-chief of Canadian Musician. Love hosting these every month. Love that you folks are joining us and always sending in great questions. So let's do it. I will hand it over to Steve momentarily. Just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about. So first, we're really going to dive into this idea of who are you and talk about the ways in which you're going to want to define and position yourself and what's unique about your story to help you stand out from the crowd, to help you generate opportunities. From there, we'll move on to how, again, these different aspects kind of swirling around your career will all fit into that. So yeah, effective and consistent messaging by way of your social media posts and profile, your digital footprint entirely. We want to talk about your live performances, your press opportunities, and so on. We'll break down for questions at that point, and then we'll come back, talk a bit about social media specifically. Well, don't need to stress its importance or ubiquity. And then after that, just a few kind of random, I don't want to say random, but just complimentary tips from all over the place. We'll talk about, someone's asking about the files to download. Let's see here. If I put that in front of you, does that help? Yeah, there's the two features I mentioned. One's just going to help you with your live performances and talk about kind of forging your identity on that side of things. The other is a profile of an act called Cave Boy that we've got in our current issue that I'm a big fan of, who have been at it for, well, years at this point, and they're just dropping their first collection of songs. They've got a few singles out, but they're doing a debut record, and they've already toured with some pretty big acts, taking advantage of some big opportunities like the Juno Masterclass. So why I've shared that is just the band, the trio, really had a clear idea of who they are, worked really hard at kind of setting the stage and building a really big profile. Also that when they do release this first collection, it's kind of got a pretty soft place to land already. Anyhow, enough from me. Steve, thrilled to have you join us. Yeah, maybe we can start. The quote's right in front of us here, so maybe we don't need to read it. But this is something that Steve mentioned just as we were getting started in planning this session that I think is worth repeating. No guarantees in the music business, but by joining us and hopefully taking some of this advice and putting it to practice, you can put yourself in a better place to succeed. So, who are you? Clear narrative, identity. I guess I'm just handing it over to you and asking to cast a wide net, but can you walk us into this a bit, Steve, and tell us why it's a subject that A, is very important, and B, why it's one that's so important to you?
Well, thanks a lot, Andrew. Well, first of all, I think that with regards to why it's so important to the artist, it starts with, if you have a clear idea of your own identity, a clear idea of your story, or sometimes I call it the narrative, that can help you focus on what kind of music you're going to write and how you are then going to present it to the world. If you can have that clear vision, then after that, you have an opportunity to put a strong team around you to help bring that vision and help build an audience. My very first job in the music industry was working for Bill O'Coin, and Bill managed Kiss in the 70s. And when I started working with him, he was managing Billy Idol. And it was Billy, when I started with him, Billy had just come off the road working his first EP, and they were about to start writing the Royale album. And that first week I was working there, Bill pulled me aside and gave me my first lesson in the music industry. And that was that those of us on this side of the ledger, those of us who aren't artists, our job is to be facilitators for the artists. But an artist needs to have their own personal vision that we can then bring to the world, try to help to amplify. That way the artist can stick to the things that are important to them with regards to writing music and performing music. That being said, the artist shouldn't step away from all the other aspects of their career. They should be integrally involved. But how the artist succeeds should come from a seed the artists themselves plant early on in their career, long before they have a manager, a publicist, a promotion person, or look for a record company. You need to be able to define yourself clearly to people so that you can make sure that when they go out to the world and they're trying to, as I say, amplify your career, they're, for all intents and purposes, using your words and your passion. And I think that's really one of the most important things, because you don't want to lose control of your own career.
Right on. Yeah, and then we, again, coming from our conversation, but you mentioned that it starts with the music. I mean, before you are a quote unquote, like a marketable artist, before you are a product, you're going to start building your body of work and kind of stumbling into your sound, which, yeah, is kind of the epicenter of this whole thing. So can you tell us a bit about, at what stage that musical identity starts to form, and then how other things like image, live show, artwork, graphic design, etc., how all of that then kind of comes into place and what influences what?
Obviously, music is the most important part, because that's what we're talking about here. And as an artist, whether you're a solo artist or you're in a band, you need to figure out exactly what it is, how you're going to sound, what kind of songs you're going to write that are going to make you stand out as a unique artist. What will make you special? What will make you seem original? And having originality is really really super important, almost more than anything else. And I think what happened. I don't mean to insult anybody by what I'm about to say, but it's true that with streaming services, the way things are right now, the barrier to entry is really, really low. And so anybody can be in their bedroom recording a song today and have it up on, Spotify and Apple before the end of the week. But unlike the olden days, many artists don't take the time to actually develop. They have access to simple recording equipment, and sometimes they have enough money that they've saved up to go into a studio and spend a lot of time and energy in a recording studio to record songs, hoping that somebody's going to hear it somewhere and they catch on and sort of give them the leg up. And that kind of stuff is few and far between, and certainly doesn't happen like it used to happen. I worked with, had a conversation with an independent artist who may or may not be on this call. I'm kind of scrolling up and down here to see if Michael is on this call. Several months ago, and I went to his studio, and he played me some music, and the music was terrific, and he clearly had a lot of talent. But there was something missing in the music. The music, I think each of the songs that he played me kind of alluded to another artist. So my suggestion to him at the time was, you know what, these are terrific, but I don't know that you're going to be able to accomplish anything with them at this point. Why don't you leave the studio for a while and go out and play these songs live and see how people react to the songs, and let the songs live and breathe out in the real world. And then maybe after 6-7 months, you can take stock of what the songs sound like at that point and maybe bring them back in. Or maybe you realize that these songs aren't the right songs for what it is you're trying to accomplish in your career, and you move on to other songs. But I think it's really important for people to develop in stages, to not just go and record a song, throw it out there, and then hope for the best.
Right. I've got Hold Steady on here too, which is something just to emphasize as we're going through all of this. I'm not referring to the band, although they're terrific. I mean, stick with it. Once you've forged or started to forge that identity, wear it loud, wear it proud. Don't chase trends. Be original and let people come to you. Andrew and I were talking the other day about Sheeran. I mean, Ed. Nobody sounded like Ed when the A-Team got on radio, right. And then after Ed Sheeran had his hit, everybody wanted to sound like Ed Sheeran. The same could be said for Mumford and Son a few years before that. In this, in a more contemporary way, there's Billie Eilish. Nobody sounded like her before, she emerged. In the not too distant past, worked with Lizzo before she had the hits this past year, and she's the same artist now as she was then. Little less, or back then she had less money to work with, but she was still very true to who she was as an artist, and she let the public come to her. She didn't change herself at all to go to the public. And if you have a clearly defined story, a clearly defined narrative, a clearly defined presentation, you can find your audience. And if you're good enough, the audience will grow. And eventually it'll get to the point of, having a career, because that's really what this is really about. This is about writing a song and hoping to have a #1 single that'll bring you $1 million today. It's about having a career that in 20 years' time, you get to look back on your life and look back on your career and say, I didn't have to have another job. I'm a working musician. I've made a living. I got a roof over my house, a roof over my head. I've been able to feed my kids. That should be the biggest goal at the beginning. Mm-hmm. You have to have a series of realistic goals that are achievable so that you can feel like you are moving forward. But, they have to be realistic. You can have
you can think big, and you can think, you can think that you're going to play a concert in a freaking dirigible one day to the entire planet, but that's not going to happen next week. There's a lot of stages you got to go through, and you have to plan for all of those stages.
Bingo. Yeah, just to, I guess, kind of build on that with another metaphor is, there's a ton of artists, forget who I'm quoting, but some would call them disposable artists that, hit the pop charts, one big hit, big amount of success, and then 6 months later, that name is just out of the public consciousness. So the idea here is, yeah, as Steve said, like going after your one big hit, if there's no foundation underneath that, then you're really just at the whim of perception of that one song. Whereas artists like Ed Sheeran that we were talking about, I didn't know that Steve had worked with Lizzo before putting her on here. But Kanye, Lizzo, Tegan, and Sarah, what they all have in common is obviously they've spent a lot of time building that foundation / building and reinforcing their identities to the point where now, love them or hate them, and a lot of people do both. I guess I'm maybe more on Kanye's side these days. But yeah, like these are artists that have that longevity, that have earned that longevity, that'll be able to ride their careers, I think, as long as they want to, which leads us perfectly, I'm sorry to be jumping around a bit on the slides, but perfectly into the beginning here with Trump versus Hillary. Yeah, I don't want to give too much away on Steve's behalf, so I'll hand it over to him. But we had a little conversation that started with those two names that was very interesting, and Steve really drove it home. Can you give us a bit of a preview of the article you're working on and how these two, how these two people factor into that?
Absolutely, my pleasure. So the one, love them or hate them, or like them or hate them, or dismiss them altogether. However you feel about Donald Trump, there's one thing that's very, very clear. You know exactly what he stands for. You know exactly who he is, and you don't have to like it. It's super clear who he is, and there were enough people in America that were able to take what he was selling and vote for it. Hillary, on the other hand, was kind of trying to be everything to everybody. Granted, she took some of it for granted, but she tried to be everything to everybody. And she, on one hand, she cried big business because people hate big business. But on the other hand, it was exposed that she took big business's money. And she claimed to be against the war, but she had voted for the war in Iraq. And she would waffle from one side to the next. And when the time came for people to vote, she won the popular vote, but he became president. Part of that is because he formed a coalition of people that believed in what he believed in, for better or worse. She, on the other hand, didn't have the same coalition. She didn't have the same strength in terms of people's beliefs in a candidate. And though you might say, well, she won the popular vote. I mean, she won by 3 million votes, and it's screwed up in America the way they have the Electoral College. That's true, but that's the way it works. And Trump and his team played the game the way you win the game. And I've written in my article, this example is sort of like Hillary has the #1 song in America, but Donald Trump turned out to be Pearl Jam. He turned out to be the successful artist that ended up having the career that she wanted.
Yeah, and then to reinforce that with folks like Trump and I guess Kanye, a lot of fit the bill. But even beyond music, think athletes, social media personalities, politicians. But a strong identity is inherently polarizing. The more forward someone is about who they are and unapologetic about that identity, the more it's kind of going to force people to say, okay, I'm into this and I'm buying into it and I'm following it, or not for me. But like, yeah, back to that other idea of a career in 20 years. It's like, if you can get, or wait, I might be getting ahead of us a bit here, but why not continue on with the trend? If you can get 100 people committed, diehard fans that'll follow and consume your every move, that is going to go a lot farther in the long run than even 100 times that amount. Say 10,000 people that heard your song on the radio and they're into it, but might never seek it out or tell a friend about it, etc. So it all kind of goes into the same pot.
You want them to buy the records. You want them to buy the T-shirts. You want them to come to the concerts. You don't want them just to stream the song. I think that one of the things is, like, if you can think of how you can be a disruptor, people will latch onto you a lot stronger, a lot more fervently than if you are just like everybody else. And there's just way too many people that are just like anybody else right now.
Right on. So we've talked about projecting that image yourself. Like, I guess when you've got the camera right in front of you, as Donald Trump so often did, you can get a very direct idea of what someone's all about. But yeah, in our world, as you're starting to build a career, build a name for yourself, have new people exposed to you in your work, this is where all of those other aspects of your career all kind of swirl around and have to homogenize, have to be consistent with identity and image. So what I've got here about identity influencing image and the other way around is kind of the idea that, like, you can, I guess, choose certain aspects of your narrative or how they get defined. Some of that, though, is just going to be inherent in who you are, what you like, how you dress, how you present yourself. So yeah, Steve, can you talk, I guess we touched on this a moment ago, but talk a bit about, like, once you've got your signature sound, once people have kind of an idea of your story, how do you then flesh that out? What are the meaty parts? What kind of things should people be focusing on in terms of their own story, their own identity, that will help them stand out from the pack?
Let me tell you all a story about Scott Hellman, that hopefully most of you that are listening to this are aware of who Scott is. Young, alternative pop singer here in Canada. So when I was working at Warner, we signed Scott as a 14-year-old several years ago. But we didn't put music right away. Our A&R person, Ron Lapata, worked with Scott, together with a bunch of different songwriters so that Scott could learn how to be a better songwriter. When we signed him, he had a really great voice, and he had he had the beginnings of being a decent artist, but he had work to do. So he spent 3.5 years working with other songwriters, learning the ins and outs of songwriting, spending time in recording studios to find out, how recording studios work, how to best make use of your time in recording studios and whatnot. Move ahead 3.5 years or so, and he started delivering a bunch of demos, and they were all really good. There was this one song that we thought for sure was our first commercial single. So we put together a plan where we would start releasing Scott Hellman content at the top of the following year, and we would work for 10 months towards the commercial release of that first single. When the time came for that we made those decisions, I went and I sat with Scott. I needed to write a bio, but I also needed to try to figure out who Scott was, what in essence his story was going to be, what his narrative was. And we talked for a couple of hours, and at one point he told me a story about how he and a friend had been up at his friend's cottage in Muskoka, and it was a rainy Sunday, and there was nothing to do, so they lay on the floor, and they started going through their friend's father's record collection. One of the records was Dark Side of the Moon. And though Scott had heard Dark Side of the Moon before, they put the record on, started smoking cigarettes, and sat there in silence with the rain falling outside. And they didn't talk for the entire length of the album. When the album was finished, Scott said to me that was the moment that he realized the power of music and how you can actually tell a story with music, and that was what he wanted to do with his music. And when he told me that, there's two things that happened to me. One was I realized it showed an incredible depth of character, that this is that this kid is more than just another Justin Bieber or Shawn Mendes. There's a depth to him that we have to make sure that people understand is out there. And the other thing that I realized as a publicist is this is exactly the kind of story that I can tell journalists that will make them interested in talking to Scott. And I certainly knew that Scott could hold his own in conversation. At the same time, when I went back to the office and we were having conversations about how we're going to launch Scott and how we're going to market Scott, Ron said, let's keep in mind that this is an alternative rock kid who happens to sing pop music. Let's not lose sight of that. So we're all good. Everybody knew what it was that we wanted to go out there and market. Move ahead to January. We're a couple of weeks away from releasing the first setup track, as it were. And Ron walks into our office, and he's got two new pieces of music. The first song that he played was Bungalow, and the second song was Machine. And when we heard these two songs, we realized that everything that Scott had been working towards was right there. His identity as an artist was now tangible in these songs. And we stopped what we were doing and we reassessed what we were going to release come October. We changed our plans and we ended up making a whole plan of launching his career, launching everything towards the release of Bungalow. And when we released Bungalow, we ended up with a platinum single, but we also ended up with a song that was uniquely Scott Helman. It set him apart from everybody else on the radio. It set him apart from all the other young pop singers that were out there. And from there, we had the roots laid for a career for this kid. And the song that we were originally going to release has never even been properly recorded, and it's never been released. It's still a great song, but I don't think it'll ever see the light of day.
Any diehard Scott Helman fans in the audience now have a new mission to unearth that tune somewhere, somehow. No, I love that. So I love getting to do it in the context of Scott, a great guy, and we've had the chance to work with him a few times over the years. So it's cool to get a bit of a peek behind the curtain as to what was going on internally with his team and your colleagues at Warner at the time. That brings us into question period. I've got one here that came in at the very beginning. I'll put in front of Steve momentarily. But here's one. Maybe I'm grasping at straws a bit here, but thinking of someone like Scott, who does have a really clear identity and a team, a major label working behind him on promo and everything. I'm curious about how fans and like the elements kind of beyond your control fit into that. For example, like say maybe lousy or unflattering live performance recordings, or fans that take it upon themselves to make fan art or fan sites that no one's going to confuse with the official thing. But like, have you ever seen an artist's identity maybe get muddied by forces around them, that wasn't messaging coming from the artist or their camp? Is that ever a thing?
Not really. Perhaps a few years ago it was more of a thing because we were trying. The industry was always trying to control things. We don't try to. I think that the industry on a whole doesn't try to control messaging quite so tightly anymore. In terms of people using music and people doing live recordings, live photos, and things like that. In particular, I think the industry still has a bee in its bonnet about people illegally using images, illegally using recordings and things like that, which is understandable. But in terms of what you're talking about, I think that everybody understands that there are enough movie cameras in people's back pockets now that very little is left to chance. And I think that at the same time, the artist has the ability to undercut that stuff sometimes by getting online immediately after a show and saying, I'm sorry that this happened, but we had a shitty night. and it's probably out there for people to see. But don't worry, when we come back to Austin, we'll give you a better show next time, whatever the case might be.
I guess one more stemming from what you were talking about with Scott, and I really appreciate you delving into anecdotes from your career. If at any point like it makes sense just to share the story without naming the artist, please opt for that. But I'm wondering, like you were just saying that with Scott, obviously you recognized talent. You had him signed to Warner Canada. He was working with Ron on artist development for a few years before the rollout. And then you told the story there about how things kind of clicked into place at a certain point. What about on the other side? Can you think of an artist or maybe a couple where it wasn't necessarily the talent and potential that drew you, but that kind of had the identity thing figured out, and that was either the main or a significant draw in what attracted you and your colleagues at Warner to them in the first place?
I think that there was a band along. Well, I mean, it's more than just, this is the one that just immediately came to mind when you asked the question.
Yeah,
there's a band from Vancouver. Back in the early '90s, we worked with it. They were called Salvador Dream, and they were way ahead of their time. I don't think that I'm off base saying that they're sort of what Tool became, but they were we're talking about way ahead of their time, but we could see what they were trying to do, and it was hard. I think it was hard for us to get that on record because because what they were doing was so different than what anybody else was doing at the time. Mm-hmm. And so, we loved the band to death, and we did the best we could. But there was also an interesting situation with that band. I ended up getting them on the cover of if anybody remembers, the front page of the Toronto Star's entertainment section used to be called What's On.
Right.
And here's a band that had no hits and had sold very, very few records, but they had a white singer, guitarist, and who was backed by a black bass player and drummer. And the story that the Star told, that I pitched to the Star to get that cover story, was how they had to deal with prejudice touring across Canada, because it was a big deal, especially given that they were such a heavy rock band.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. That I guess it can be anything that's unique that you can dwell on. It needn't be musical or even, something that you do or that you portray. Like your example says there, that's something that essentially happened to someone that, you can use as a hook to try and generate opportunities.
Most people are more interested in human stories than they are in the story of how music got made.
Well said. Which we are always navigating that with our work at the magazine. Very well said. So we've got two questions here that kind of combine together. And so, Lynn, if you don't mind me kind of tucking yours under Davis, Kara, and Amy's. And hey, Davis, good to be in touch again. So Davis, Kara, and Amy ask, they write and perform pop, country, ballads, and rap. Now, you can tell me now, is that under the same project name, or are these just different things that you do individually and share? Like, is it all under one artistic banner? And then if you can get that to us quickly enough, I guess the question though, Steve, is does that work against an artist in not sticking to one discernible musical style?
I honestly think it just depends on how it's presented.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine, as I was looking at one band. The way I was looking at it, I was thinking the image that came to mind were the Tubes, that weren't necessarily all those things, but they're kind of or Funkadelic. There's a kind of presentation that allows for that kind of eclectic musical mix on stage, but it becomes how it's presented. If you are, 4 or 5 people sitting, standing on stage in jeans, t-shirts, I don't think it's going to play personally. But if you have a context that people in the audience are being entertained, they'll walk away, oh my God, you should have seen this band. They did all of these outrageous things, and their music just, covered a cornucopia of genres. Sure. Well, anything. I think anything can work. You just need to give context, and you need to understand that you don't want the audience to have to figure it out for you. You have to present it to the audience, what you want them to see. That's why it's important that you, as the artist, are the ones that define the story, as opposed to letting other people define it for you.
Oh, good point. And to touch on 2 names that we've mentioned earlier, but maybe the best example is Billie Eilish, in terms of not even having a discernible genre. And look what she's been able to do. Not to that extensive a degree, but I think Lizzo fits into that too. I mean, she raps. She's got a huge voice and can do R&B soul. She does straight up pop, and then like even really jazzier stuff. Check out her NPR Tiny Desk concert. But yeah, all this to say, as Steve's mentioning, I think too, like of the genres you mentioned, if you write and perform pop, country, ballads, and rap, so long as it sounds like each of those are your brand of pop, country, ballads, and rap, and that it's not kind of a mishmash of, or derivative of other people's stuff. If it feels authentic, people will latch onto it. They'll get it. And if it feels forced and just, well, there's lots of synonyms I can throw in there, but I think that goes a long way too. And then it goes back to hold steady, own it, like embrace it. If this is what you do, if this is the purest distillation of your art and how you want to get it out there, then the harder that you ride that and push it out there, I think the more it's going to serve to prove your authenticity and that, this is the real deal. Am I okay so far, Steve?
Well, think of Nas X. I mean, if, before you see the whole thing, someone just told you what this guy was about, who would just completely dismiss it. And then, but given that the presentation and the song together turns the whole thing, gives the context that people can latch onto, and then it becomes the biggest hit of 2019.
Okay. Yeah, might as well do a couple others before, or no, you know what? Let's steamroll on. We've got about 20 minutes to round out our hour here. We'll get back to a couple of these momentarily, but for now, let's see here. So yeah, with social media, we were talking specifically about the rollout. So if you've got a new song, say a new album, but you are releasing something, you've got a product to put out, we want to give you a few tips as to how to do that, how to position it, and more specifically, what kind of content you want to be creating and presenting that's going to fit into what we're talking about, that's going to be aligned with your brand, that's going to go straight at the core of your fan base. But then talk about how that content can then keep your fans engaged, but then keep spreading. The whole idea of social media, viral, shareable, etc. So yeah, Steve, I don't know if you've got sort of a case study on this, or we just kind of walk through it chronologically, but yeah, give us the good.
Yeah, let's walk through it. But first, I'm just going to go back because you said a dirty word to me, and that was brand. Yeah, no, you use the term brand, and I got a real bug up my ass about the word brand, because I think that Kleenex and McDonald's are brands. What we're talking about here are human beings, and human beings have stories, and stories are narratives. So that's why I'm calling this defining your story, or defining your narrative, because I think for too many years people were saying, oh, with social media, you have an opportunity to build your brand. And I just feel like until you're ubiquitous, you're not a brand. So I just wanted to say that out loud, because I wanted the opportunity to actually let people know that I feel like we're talking to humans here, and I think that's important. But
really no,
there are no solid rules anymore. Everybody gets to make up their own rules, and so I think that again, each project needs to be handled in a new and unique way. And you take a look at, what it is you're trying to accomplish and what is the best way that you can accomplish it with the music that you are creating. Somebody might say, we need to put out an album because it's a body of work and this gives people an idea of exactly who we are. And that is valid and it's perfectly fine, but it's really tough to get people to pay attention to you for long periods of time in the world that we live in right now. And my personal feeling is, especially for a developing artist, if every time you put out a new song, that's a new opportunity for you to create content to drive people to that song. And the content that you create is the content that will reinforce your narrative and let people get a better understanding of who you are as an artist. Mm-hmm. So let's say, for argument's sake, you've recorded 12 songs. And let's say, for argument's sake, because it's truer than not, you're not going to get any radio airplay. Then if you put out one song every month, that means you have a new opportunity every 4 weeks to remind people that you're out there and to build the story of who you are as an artist. And you have 4 weeks between each release to plan out what kind of content you're going to put out there to draw people to that one song and to continue to build the layers of the onion that is your story. So in essence, you end up with a year's worth of promotion for yourself. If you insist on putting out a full album, you might have a month or two of putting out 1 or 2 songs beforehand to give people a taste. But once the album's out there, you better be out touring and you better be trying to push that record, on your, through your merch table, because you're not going to have that many opportunities to promote that record to people. You'll have 3 or 4 weeks and you'll be done.
Right. Any tips then as to, and as specific as you'd be willing to go, but tips on the type of thing, whether it's a text post, whether it's, say an acoustic cover video that you're posting on Facebook, but is there any hard ideas people can use that would make a post that fits into that idea of making it easy for other people to share and that might latch on to that kind of once removed fan, the person who's a potential fan through another fan?
I'll use this as an example. Let's say you're a songwriter and you want people that your thing is that you want people to know that you have whatever you call it with regard to integrity as a songwriter. You can spend that month putting together content where you take apart your song, you explain to people how you wrote the song, you explain to people in another piece of content the story behind the lyrics of the song. You can, in another piece of content, tell people about your influences, and maybe in another piece of content do some covers of some of your influences. And you can do an acoustic version, and then you can do a studio version. You can possibly do a souped up live version. Maybe you can bring a couple of artists to do alternative rap, whatever. There's a million ideas, and that's the thing that's really exciting about social media and the way the world is right now, is that there are endless opportunities for people, and all you need to do is use your imagination and go for it. There's again, you get to write the rules, and there are plenty of things I'm sure I can't think of right this second, though there are plenty I can. But I think that tomorrow we might scroll through our social platforms and see somebody doing something we never imagined before in our lives, and hopefully we can take inspiration from that and take the idea and not copy it, but certainly take inspiration from the idea and come up with something new and fresh that we would never have imagined.
Nice.
I think the other part of it is, don't just look at other musicians. Don't just listen to music. Read a lot, and listen to a lot of podcasts, and make sure that you're experiencing the whole world, because there are so many things that can influence you and help you see things that other people outside of the music industry are doing, and you should be using that kind of stuff. Whether it's a silly commercial you see online or on TV, whether it's a graphic you see on a cereal box, whatever. There's just so much out there that we can take from.
Right on. Yeah, moving on here, and this was something I wanted to include. It seems kind of maybe like it's coming out of left field, or actually it almost circles right back to where we started here. But Steven mentioned when it came time to picking singles with past clients, that he would always opt for the song that best defined the artist and the project at hand, not that was going to fit into format, trends, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, I'm thinking of Billie Eilish. I mean, Bad Guy, I know there are examples, but I can't think of one now, like a absolute smash radio hit that basically has like 2 musical movements contained within it. Oh yeah, and I guess when we go back to the idea of 100 diehards. So yeah, I hope I didn't just give away all the goods, but tell us a bit more about when it comes to singles or even video treatments, et cetera, just how you're choosing which foot to lead on and where to focus your resources.
All right, I have a couple of examples in my head that I can think of. One for the single thing, and one for a video thing. So I'll start with the single thing. Used to have an artist on the label called Lorena McKinnett. And Lorena was already popular around the world as a new age artist. She was a sort of like Enya, a Canadian version of Enya, hugely successful, had never had any success at radio. We had a song called Mother's Dance on a record that everybody chose as the single, because one, she was a very focused artist, so all the music that she made, no matter how commercial it might sound or otherwise, it was all very identifiable as Lorena McKinnett. But this was a song that would stand a chance at radio if somebody would give it a chance. We went to radio, and the first week nobody played it at all. And I called a friend that worked at Chubb at the time, and Chubb, we felt, could play the record, but they had to get over the idea that Lorena McKinnett was a new age artist. And I said to my friend, do me a favor, phone all the record stores in Toronto and see what the number one record in Toronto is, because it's Lorena McKinnett, and the people that are buying her record are the people that are listening to your radio station. And she did that. The next week, she took it into the meeting with all that information, and they added the record. And Chum was the only radio station that was playing the record in Canada for the first week or two. But the response was so huge that everybody else across the country was then sort of forced to play it, and it became a massive hit. Mm-hmm. On the video end, when I was working at Attic Records, we had an artist on the label called Lee Aaron, who was a hard rock heavy metal artist, female hard rock artist, who had a sort of novelty song called Metal Queen that was sort of a weird kind of hit, but she had, it didn't really build a lot of integrity, but she built a reasonable fan base through it. She recorded a new album called Body Talk. And the first single was going to be a song called What You Do to My Body. And we had put out for concepts, for video concepts. And everybody had always said to me, she's really great on camera, and so she could sell anything. And she had already done a whole bunch of concept videos that, quite frankly, if you went and looked, with all due respect, if anyone's related to her, I'm sorry, but some of them, were pretty silly. And I said, look, if she's so strong and is such a strong performer, why don't we just put her in a big white room with nothing else except the camera and the band behind her and let her perform to the camera? And we ended up with a double platinum album because she was that strong of a performer. The camera loved her, and it really worked out. But nobody else was doing that kind of stuff at the time. Everybody was going for the big budget, Michael Jackson type videos.
I remember Metal Queen. It's like mid 80s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, on. And then, again, going back to something that Stephen mentioned from his time working with the coin management earlier in his career, that we did mention here, but this plays into a few people's questions. The idea of reinforcing your image and identity through your team. Like, this starts with you and your, I guess, going back to the metaphor of foundation. But then the quote from Bill, Steve's old boss, about the job being facilitators for the artist's vision, and the clearer that vision, the better the job we can do. So it's, the more in tune you are with your story, with your image, the easier it is for other people to take that and run with it, those being the people on your team. And then by extension, the easier it is for people like me and the press to see something they want to latch onto, a story they want to tell. For people booking gigs, maybe folks looking for openers for really big artists, the clearer your story, image, identity, just the easier it is for everyone to connect the dots, which means the easier it is for opportunity generation, et cetera, et cetera. And just really reinforcing that, the idea of holding strong, not wavering from your convictions, from that story. This is our last slide. Anything here that you want to take home, Steve, before we jump to some of the questions in the queue?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that, I know that it can be really difficult for an artist to take a step back and do self-analysis, and that's kind of what I'm trying to present with my business. Is I'm trying to help artists. I hope to present an objective point of view, to be a sounding board, but also to be able to be the person that can take a step back from an artist, to listen to all the music that they have, take a look at the way that they're currently presenting themselves, and help them articulate what their vision is, so that when I say, a better shot at success, a lot of independent artists will go and they'll search out a publicist, or they'll search out a promoter person or an agent, and they'll not really have a plan for themselves as to what they want to accomplish with those people. And though all these people that they're going to go out and hire are professionals and know how to do their jobs, it's up to the artist to give them the materials that will help them do the jobs better. And if you are hiring a publicist that is going to contact a media outlet with 3 or 4 other artists at a time, you want to be able to present that publicist with the strongest story, that when the editor, journalist, publisher takes a look at those 4 or 5 pitches, yours is the one that rises to the top. The same for when a radio promotion person is taking records into radio. I mean, there's a lot of things to consider, not the least of which is, does the sound of that record fit with what we're doing? Also, it's like you want to have the kind of story that they can talk about on air. And the same thing with an agent. You want a booking agent? You want to help the booking agent do the best job that they can to get you the best gigs that they can. That means building a story that they can then pitch to, nightclubs or whatever, or other artists to take you out on tour. And from there, you can start building your success, and the story gets layer upon layer upon layer until you've reached whatever your goal is for that year.
Hang on. I'm excited to get to some of these questions. Thank you, Steve, for the insights, and hopefully plenty more where that came from here. Where are we going to start? Oh yeah, Kristen, I love this question. Kristen's wondering, how do you discern which parts of your personal or private identity ought to be included in your public identity as an artist? She says, much of my songwriting is informed by my religious beliefs, but I worry about alienating people or not being taken seriously as an artist if I'm open about this as I develop my identity. So yeah, maybe we can tackle that in 2 steps about, where you draw that line between public and private image, and then carry on to the idea of religious topics and themes in lyricism.
Ultimately, you get to decide what it is, what it is that you want to project to people. And I think that, like, as I said, it's like sometimes it's hard for people to see for themselves exactly what it is that makes them special. So I think that having an outsider's opinion, somebody who isn't family member, can help with that quite a bit. There's many layers to all of us as human beings, and trying to figure out what the most powerful statement we can make is sometimes difficult to do, which is why people work with teams to help figure that kind of stuff out. The one thing that you definitely don't want is someone to tell you what to do. It's one thing for someone to put a mirror up to you, and then you look at all these things that you have, that you have to offer. But you don't want anyone to tell you what to do. You don't want anyone to project onto you their idea of who you are. And with regards to the religious lyrics and whatnot, I think that also comes with, you have to decide, you have to be true to yourself, and you have to decide what kind of artist are you. Maybe it's appropriate to to share that kind of message in your music. If that's not the kind of artist you are, but that those lyrics, those types of lyrics drive you, maybe what you need to do is go back and use lyrics that you've written as inspiration for another set of lyrics. Again, it's hard to say without actually sitting down with somebody and taking a look at everything that they have on offer. It's hard to give that kind of advice, just because, again, it depends on who you are as a person and what you are going to be comfortable with.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I guess is it's kind of an obvious plug, but very topical. Again, I am stevewaxman.com. Head over there, and maybe this is something that you can flesh out a bit with a consult. To get a little bit more in depth on you personally. Because it's inherently kind of subjective what we're talking about here, or at least individual. Now Ashley's question here, I'm wondering if maybe this is something we should tackle because it casts a very, very wide net, but she's wondering about the best way to promote bands who are ready to take the next step to be signed. Ashley, why don't you shoot me an email on this, because I think there's a lot of different facets that go beyond just the subject of our webinar. But we won't leave you hanging. Another one from Kristen is, how do you approach helping an artist in defining and or telling their story? Like things like writing things down, creating an elevator pitch. Maybe the question is, how do you go about really distilling this process into a few key things that everyone can then latch onto, unify around, and then build on?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me tell you quickly a story about myself. I was trying last week to, I was explaining to somebody what I was doing my business, and at the end of us talking, he said to me, "So, how do I? This all sounds great, but how do I explain it to some of our clients what it is that you're doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm consulting." And he kind of looked at me funny, like consult is a dirty word. But then I kind of looked at him and I went, "Well, I guess what I'm really doing is career guidance. And then they smiled, and that's sort of, it was funny because it's like, here I am talking about, defining your narrative, and I realized until that moment that I hadn't actually defined mine. And that comes out of conversations, and it came out of somebody asking me a very simple question, and I think that's what it is having a conversation with people. And like I said, when I spoke to Scott, that was 2.5 hour conversation with him to get that one little nugget out. I didn't know what I was looking for. It was just, he didn't know what to tell me. We were just in a conversation, and something that was so salient showed itself to us.
Right. Yeah, interesting. I guess it kind of building on that as an extension. Another way you can do that or figure it out, or at least like figure out how it might appear from the outside looking in. If you read or watch or listen to interviews with musicians, there's kind of like 10 some questions that are just always going to get thrown out there. Where did you get your band name? And as awful as they are, I think like going through that and talking about some of the things you might be asked, and then coming up with how you're going to respond is really going to help get a lot kind of thrown at the wall. And then once it's all kind of out there for you to see, you can go through and distill and decide what you want to focus on, knowing that a lot of these things are going to come up in press interviews as you get bios written, et cetera, et cetera. Just to get as much out there as possible, and then figure out what's unique, what's worth focusing on. Kind of a next step, I suppose. If anyone else has any other questions to throw in, well, actually, you know what? Why don't we just cap it here? Ashley, hit us up with an email. I'm aking@nwcworld.com. We'll get you taken care of. Thanks to everyone that's sending in the nice things here. We'll forward that on to Steve. Again, I am, and by that I mean the letters I and the letter M. SteveWaxman.com is where you can go to find out more about what Steve's doing. Get in touch if you want to learn more, because again, we've been speaking in generalities here, but it's really in sitting down with someone individual and getting a real feel for who they are and what they want to do, that you're going to get the most valuable kind of custom tailored advice here. And then, once we sign off here, before end of day tomorrow, you'll get an email for registering that just saying thanks, with a link to the session posted on YouTube that you can then feel free to share or use as you see fit. And we're going to be doing more with Steve. We've got a column coming up in the next issue of Canadian Musician, fleshing out this topic a bit more. We're going to have him on the podcast. He's got a brand new podcast that just launched. You know what, maybe I'll hand it over to you, because I didn't really get any specific talking points before. But the first episode is with Jim Cuddy. It's called The Creationists. Can you tell us a bit about the show and maybe where future episodes are going to take us?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for bringing it up. Yeah, it's called The Creationists, and it's a podcast about people who create. There'll be 7 episodes in the first season. Jim Cuddy was talking about songwriting is the first episode. There's an episode with a world-renowned golf course designer talking about how you design a golf course. There's a fashion designer talking about how to design a line of clothes. There's a luthier, Linda Manzer, who some of you might know, builds all of Pat Metheny's guitars. So there's a interview with her talking about building guitars. As a matter of fact, did the interview in her studio while she was working on Pat Metheny's next guitar. So that was kind of cool. And another episode is with an author, and another episode with a glass artist. So it's exciting for me, because I've always had a fascination with creativity. I've always been lucky enough to have a career where I work with creative people. So it's really a blast. But I did want to say, if this will help anybody, whoever gets in touch with me, this isn't a contest, whomever ever gets in touch with me, my first question always is, what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? So that might help you guys with regards to trying to, figure out the first steps of sort of defining that narrative. is trying to answer that first question: what are you trying to achieve?
Bang on. Well, we could have started with that, but we ended with it. Please join me. Well, you already have. Thank you. There's a ton of gratitude here for you, Steve. And yeah, I'll be back in touch shortly. But thank you so much to Steve Waxman for joining us. Thank you to everyone else that's listening for taking part, for the great questions. There's plenty more where this came from. We're going to be back in late February with Aaron Kinghorn from Digital Promotions Group and eProductions, talking about the world of streaming playlists, and maybe most specifically Spotify. How do you get onto these? Is it that important that you do? How do we maximize your efforts when pitching to playlists, etc.? nwcwebinars.com is where you can go to check out all of our past sessions, and where you can go to register that. So thanks a ton. I'm signing off from here, wishing everybody a very good evening. And thanks again, Steve. It's been a treat.
My pleasure. Take care.